Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're in the company of political scientist Assiem El-Difraoui.
Good evening.
Glad you could make it.
Yeah, I'm very glad because, terror also, and terror and football in a combination slows traffic a little down in Paris, so at this stage. So
there is a tournament going on.
Yeah.
Also with us from Washington, he's a former advisor to the U.S. Defense Department, security consultant Ubay Shah Bandar. Welcome back as well. From Antwerp, Belgium, to Ricardo Beretsky. Assiem El-Difraoui, before we look into some of the political reactions to what happened west of Paris overnight, your reaction to something Ricardo Beretsky said before the break was that the lapses in intelligence could also be mean an infiltration of police forces.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't agree with Ricardo. I think we should be very careful about scaremongering. We should really keep very calm heads. ISIS has very limited intelligence abilities so far in Europe or the United States. The police officer who was killed with his wife yesterday in a French suburb, was living very closely to the area where the killer lived. So it's not very difficult to identify a local police officer. So far, we didn't have had any real hardcore intelligence work of ISIS in Europe, and their intelligence capabilities in cyber are quite low. Obviously, they can buy encryption programs, to encrypt their proper communications, but they for years threatened with a cyber war, which we haven't seen. We need to be vigilant, but especially at these difficult times, we shouldn't go into scaremongering and exaggerate the capabilities of the so-called Islamic State. That's exactly falling into the propaganda and the general trap of this asymmetric warfare the so-called Islamic State is doing. They want to show us that they're much more powerful than they are in reality.
You mentioned propaganda. That seems to be the one area where they are powerful. They seem to be good at skirting attempts to shut down their messages on the internet.
Yeah, but they're only powerful because the Western internet industry allows them to be so. They use the latest technologies available, technologies which are not regulated. I'm generally against restrictions of the free internet, but the providers, the internet industry really seriously needs to think about what it's putting on the market. The horrible attack yesterday was filmed through Facebook Live. Nobody thought about Facebook Live being used for this kind of purposes, where there's no control whatsoever. But that's a huge open debate we need to lead in Europe without falling into censorship and fear.
Ubay Shah Bandar, your thoughts? Should Facebook Live be taken down? I mean, that was up for quite a little while before Facebook took it down.
Well, look, ISIS and its media arm will always find some sort of outlet to attempt to project and promote its propaganda, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, other mediums of social media. I mean, right now, one of the favorite social media messaging apps, Telegram, is often used by ISIS and its members to send internal messages and to send messages to the world. I think we absolutely have to be vigilant to not allow ISIS to win the media war and the propaganda war. We should not allow these radical Islamist terrorists to project a much stronger image than they actually are. They are losing ground in Libya. They're losing lots of ground in Iraq and in Syria and in elsewhere. And that is why ISIS leaders have ordered these attacks well over a year ago in Western Europe and in the United States in order to project this image that ISIS and the so-called notional Islamic State is much more powerful than it actually is. Well, while in fact they are facing significant ground losses in Raqqa, in northern Syria, and in northern Iraq. So I think we should be very careful to not allow the media and other aspects of social media to allow the Islamic State to win the propaganda war, and that is something that they're very heavily focused on.
All right, let's look at the political reactions. A lot of politicians backing up police unions this Tuesday who are calling for French police to be able to carry weapons when they're off duty. Another reaction regards the attacker himself. He was sentenced in September 2013 to 2.5 years in prison over his role in a jihadist group with links to Pakistan. He was freed because of time already served, a point brought up by one of conservative leader Nicolas Sarkozy's former ministers, the Paris region president Valérie Pécresse.
The killer had already been sentenced to prison for terrorist activities. But what happens when they get out of jail? We know that sadly in France, the big problem is the lack of follow-up. If these radicalized inmates have completed their prison sentence, and there is no reason to believe that they've changed their ways, I'm in favor of placing them in detention centers because they present a danger to society as a whole.
Detention centers. What do you think of that idea, Asia?
That's one of my great favorites. An American newspaper was writing, the French are trying to do Guantanamo on the Loire. That's a very dangerous thing to do because you don't want to have those people together in a sense that you create new radical meeting points. They might further radicalize if they're all together. Some of those people have been really harmless. You know, they were.
But in this case, it's a failure, right? The guy comes out of jail.
No, but Valérie Pécresse made the French ex-minister mentioned a very important point. There was no follow-up after jail, and there was no any form of de-radicalization in prison. Especially under the government Sarkozy, he didn't do nothing in this. So it's not the first time. I mean, most of the attackers of the horrible attacks of Charlie Hebdo have been in prison. The same for many people of the November attacks in Paris, because former French governments, and this government is still too slow, didn't do any follow-up.
But is it mission impossible?
Most European. No, it is possible.
Because we got 1,000, what is it, people who've just been, among those who've been or have been or have already returned from Syria and is it mission impossible having enough manpower to do that?
It's not mission impossible. It will take time. Several other countries do it.
Like who?
Germany does it, for example. Like Britain does it. Britain has very efficient de-radicalization strategies in prison. It does follow up, but it takes time to meet in place. And the current French government is trying to put stuff into place, but it started very late, and they're progressing very, very slowly. But centers are definitely the most difficult thing. And which danger do centers represent for our liberty? I mean, the New York Times, a couple of months ago, wrote an article about France, an op-ed front page signed by several people from the New York Times, criticizing France for repeating the same polarizing mistakes the Bush administrations did in the United States after September 11th.
All right. There's also the tone that's been used. The president, François Hollande, who in the wake of the Paris attacks talked of France being at war against terrorism, once again this Tuesday employing the T word, terrorism, in the hours that followed the attack.
This is undeniably a terrorist act. France isn't the only country that has been targeted. We've seen this again these past few days in the United States, in Orlando. And we've also seen it in Europe and in the rest of the world. France is faced with an extremely potent terrorist threat.
Ricardo Beretsky, perhaps the French president will ultimately be right, but is he too quick off the draw to lump together Orlando and what happened west of Paris overnight?
I don't think so. I think he knows what's going on. You know, I just want to comment something also on a previous comment. Fear-mongering is a word that I think is very dangerous when one comes using that and say, well, we are promoting fear-mongering and ignorance is an even more dangerous thing. The reality is here, we're dealing with terrorists. We're not dealing with academics in this traditional way. And we're dealing with terrorism that the ordinary people don't understand, and many academics don't understand because they haven't done it or haven't been on the ground. We have seen this in Africa. I was on the ground when these things happened many years ago in Africa, so I am aware of how this works. And what we have to understand is that the present situation in France and the president is learning his way as he's going along. And that's, in a way, a very dangerous thing in itself because they haven't got the experience. They haven't been in this situation before. And they're learning as they're going along. The reality here is costing lives, and it's going to cost a lot more lives. And the reality is what we are witnessing now is only the beginning. If you look back at the report we published in 2014, together with Italy, the intelligence report for all of Europe, it was very clear that we warned that this situation is going to continue. We have seen all the attacks since then. And mostly important is do not underestimate the capability of ISIL. If they're not sitting in a cave, they're not people sitting in caves and in backyards like people think. This is a highly sophisticated criminal organization in a higher sense of its.
All right, let me bring Ubay. We heard Asyam El Difraoui, so let me bring in Ubay Shah Bandar and ask him: is it the ISIS is really good, or is it that law enforcement agencies are not? I wouldn't say really bad, but certainly not yet up to speed.
Well, it's about leadership. And first of all, we heard François Hollande use the right word here, which is the W word, war. We are at war with radical Islamist terrorists, their networks, and their ideology. And it is the W word that the Obama administration specifically does not want to use and has consistently refused to use in describing the conflict against radical Islamist terrorists, ISIS, and its international networks. And I think that is a very important distinction to make, because we are absolutely at war with these radical terrorists and their ideology. Now, it may come in different forms. It's asymmetric. We should absolutely not overestimate their capability, but we should absolutely not underestimate their capability, because these radical Islamist terrorists only have to be successful once. No matter how many attacks the West prevents, these terrorists succeed if they are successful once. And so there is absolutely no follow-up. What happens when these guys are released from prison, from Brussels, from Paris, from Orlando or San Antonio? There needs to be follow-up. Their passports need to be taken away. Their right to purchase semi-automatic weapons locally in the United States needs to be taken away. They need to be constantly monitored. Constant overwatch is the key word here, and we are absolutely at war. And François Hollande was right to use that word, and he only wish that the Obama administration would follow suit.
Asyam El Difraoui?
Yeah, I think fear-mongering is bad, ignorance is bad, but ignorant fear-mongering is even worse. So I've been on the ground for many years. I have met jihadists in Europe, in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. I've spoken to them many times. And we really need to look at the root causes of jihadism. So security issues are one huge issue. But if we want to attack the root cause of jihadism, we need to look at socioeconomic misery in the Middle East, socioeconomic misery in French suburbs. We need to deconstruct the ideology. We need to offer perspectives.
Is the French president right to use it?
I disagree with that. Look at the terrorists in Orlando. If I may. You know, that theory has really been debunked, frankly. Look at the terrorist in Orlando. He was well off, he had a job, he had a family, a good education.
Yeah, but
we saw that in the terrorists in Virginia and San Bernardino. So frankly, I really don't give that thought that is some socioeconomic misery is behind these attacks. In Brussels, the terrorists owned a bar. They were well off. They had subsidies.
Yeah.
There is something, the key driving factor here is the ideology.
No, I said ideology, and I said there are other root causes. So we need to deconstruct the ideology.
And what about François Hollande's use of the word war?
I'm not really happy with the word war because it gives Daesh, as I prefer to call the so-called Islamic State, more importance than it has. So it gives them some kind of equal footing. But I would totally agree to say that we are in a very long-term conflict against jihadis, ideology, and whatever feeds this ideology.
All right, the defeat of this ideology, let's look at some of the political reactions, whether or not they're helping to defeat the ideology. The far-right National Front, its leader, Marine Le Pen, putting out a video message on Facebook this Tuesday where she stated that the government is not protecting the French and that, quote, the real battle against fundamentalism has yet to be waged. Over in the United States, when they sparred over the Orlando shootings, the U.S. presidential candidates, Monday, both talked of their nation's values.
The Orlando terrorist may be dead, but the virus that poisoned his mind remains very much alive. And we must attack it with clear eyes, steady hands, unwavering determination, and pride in our country and our values.
Hillary Clinton can never claim to be a friend of the gay community as long as she continues to support immigration policies that bring Islamic extremists to our country and who suppress women, gays, and anyone else who doesn't share their views or values.
Ubay Shah Bandar, is it legitimate to have turned this concern over security into a debate about Muslims as a general rule?
Well, look, I mean, Donald Trump is, as usual, completely wrong on this issue. This has nothing to do with immigration. This is an American citizen who was actually born not that far in Palm Beach from where Donald Trump's one of his homes exists. You know, this is an issue of local homegrown terror, not an issue of Muslim immigration to the United States. In fact, we saw these heartwarming pictures immediately after the terror attacks in Orlando of American Muslims lining up to give blood to provide solace. You know, this is the fact of the matter is that you have just as many Muslims who are being killed by this radical Islamist ideology and ISIS terrorists as you have any other religion. So this is not about an issue of a religion or allowing Muslims to emigrate to the United States. And this is really an issue of politicizing the terror attacks and the radical ideology rather than coming up with concrete, operational, and intelligence-based common sense approach to prevent these attacks from happening again. And that's what I think we need to maintain our focus on.
Asiam El Difraoui, I'm going to show you something that came to us from across the channel over in Britain. A pro-Brexit group close to UKIP quickly deleted a tweet on Monday amid outrage over its content. Islamist extremism is a real threat to our way of life. Act now before we see an Orlando-style atrocity here before too long. Leave.eu. These terror attacks, are they helping to fuel the Brexit campaign? Are they helping Donald Trump? Are they helping Marine Le Pen?
Sure they are. I mean, like when George Bush was the best ally with his war on terror and his crusade of Osama bin Laden, Daesh, or the so-called Islamic State, is the best ally of right-wing populism of all forms in Europe. You know, that's what they want to do, and we are falling into the trap. I mean, the aim of all these terror attacks, whether it might be in the United States or it might be in Europe, is to create as much Islamophobia as possible, to create as much hatred in terms of against Muslims as possible, to divide our societies in order to better recruit.
So Ubay was mentioning there a lack of leadership. What should the leaders who are not of that opinion be doing that they're not?
Which leaders, first of all?
Well, the leaders of France, Britain, the United States.
They should really work. I mean, obviously, you know, they need to lead in terms of anti-terrorism measures, but they really need to hold together our societies. They really need to find and start an open debate why jihadism is so dangerous, that it's not only a security problem, but that there's also something in our societies which doesn't work that well. I mean, the interesting thing is, why don't we reach here in France several thousand of young French citizens, and the Islamic State is so attractive for them. So it's really, to fight jihadism, we need a comprehensive approach out of a societal debate, an ideological deconstruction of jihadism, and we really need to communicate our values, very clear-cut. We as a democratic societies, we are the best places to live in this world, whether it be Europe or the United States. And that Muslims here can live their Islam much better than, for example, in authoritarian Saudi Arabia or in those countries where there's not even any kind of freedom in Islam. So we really need to hold our core values against the jihadi seduction.
Ricardo Beretsky, why is the West so bad at this, at getting the message about their values across?
Well, let me comment on this. You know, ideology. To think that one can successfully manage the direction of ideology, that brings a total false sense of security to the nations. And this is really important to understand why. We're dealing with people. We're dealing with people with emotions and feelings. We're dealing with people who, in the process of radicalization, who has built a specific perception of how they have to see and perceive the world. But the reality is, the minute they turn to violence, they become a threat to the society. And the international community has to recognize that, particularly in Europe, that we're dealing with something they do not understand and trying to make sense of. But there's an issue of timing involved. You know, the US has experienced terrorism before Europe in the chain, if we go back for the last 15 years.
That's
But
wrong.
Europe is
That's
only
already
now
wrong.
beginning-
Europe was hit much earlier by terrorist attacks in the United States.
Please let me finish. I've listened to you. Now give me a chance to talk. Right, okay? Because what you're doing is making it all look okay to the whole world. And it's not okay. The reality is that we are at war. The reality is there's an international war going, and it's a silent war. The reality is what we are witnessing now is only the tip of the iceberg. And the reality is it's going to get much worse. And the reason why is because we've seen this in the past. We have got an historical track down the record, seeing this in Africa. We have seen it moving from North Africa straight to the south.
Ricardo, we're running short on time, unfortunately, so we're going to have to leave it there, but we will continue the discussion. I want to thank you for joining us from Antwerp. I want to thank as well WIBAUX Shahbandar for being with us from Washington. Assiem El Difraoui. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to Emma James. Lots of reaction, of course, to this 3-year-old boy orphaned by that knife attack by a man who 3 weeks ago, according to the Paris prosecutor, had claimed allegiance to ISIS.
Yes, it really is devastating stuff. I mean, when it becomes a daily thing that you are talking about yet another terror attack, it is just heartbreaking. And this particular attack happened as Paris was actually marking its solidarity with the people of Orlando. The Eiffel Tower lit up in the rainbow colours last night with the hashtag Love Wins projected onto it. And that's just 50 kilometres away from where this was actually playing out. The photographs now of the 2 people who were killed last night have been released, Jean-Baptiste Salvin and his partner Jessica Schneider. Those are the faces of the victims behind this crime. But this cartoon is desperately heartbreaking, I think it's fair to say, done by the French cartoonist Na, and it shows the child that was orphaned in this attack, a 3-year-old boy who was there and witnessed the murders of his parents. One can only imagine the kind of damage that that could do. Now, what has marked this case out in particular is the use of social media, not before the attack, but during it. Facebook Live, which only came into being in April this year, has been used and will now become synonymous, really, with this attack. He was broadcasting for 13 minutes, Larossi Abala, who had his own Facebook account, obviously, and during that time, he said that he was answering ISIS's call for lone wolf attacks during the course of Ramadan, and that Euro 2016 would become a graveyard. Now, obviously, the video has been deleted. It was reposted by the PR arm, if you like, of the Islamic State group. But David Thompson, a French journalist who is an expert in jihadi movements, watched the video before it was taken down, and he talks about the fact that the child is behind the man as he's speaking, sitting on the sofa, and after killing his parents, he actually said that he didn't know what he was going to do with the boy.
Assiem El Difraoui.
Yeah, I'm so shocked. I mean, I'm basically a specialist in jihadi propaganda. I wouldn't even talk about those details at this stage anymore because it's too shocking and it plays in this ultra-violent game.
It plays into their hands to talk about it?
It plays in their hand. I'm even refusing those days to describe the content of these videos. When I give my lectures, for example, even if journalists take all the security measures, all the ethnic measures we should take, people would look up those videos just because they're mentioned.
So should Facebook Live be banned?
It should be controlled in some ways.
Controlled.
And Facebook has enough money, they have people to look into that, and they need to react very quickly. The industry is moving, but is moving much too slowly. And as I said, I'm totally against censorship, but especially American internet giants who would censor, a nude breast, allow for a degree of violence, which is totally inadmissible and totally unhuman.
It is one of the biggest problems, I think, that Facebook faces in terms of its publicity machine, is the fact that there is this, as you say, unfairness in terms of a video showing women how to examine their breasts for lumps to get a warning sign, an early warning sign of breast cancer, will be censored, and yet this was allowed to appear. Lobs talks about the fact that this attack live on Facebook was just a question of time. And they also talk about the fact that this guy actually had lots of videos that he'd posted online. He was very prolific on social media, but not necessarily anything to do with extremism. He used the pseudonym Dr. Food because he'd actually set up a business delivering late night food to people. And that's a detail that I think will be very, very alarming to anyone who lives in that area,
And
because he was going to people's homes.
especially like all these European or Western jihadis, I mean, they're e-natives, they know all of that. And a lot of them just want to get known as other criminals at all cost. So
Fame at all costs.
fame at all costs.
We're gonna
That's
have-
what some people, some of those murderers said.
All right, we're gonna have to leave it there because we're short on time. Emma James, I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.